B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, April 25th, 2018. We're posting the podcast a little later than usual today. The secret studio has been upgraded, and we offer our heartfelt thanks to the Chief Technical Officer of the Peter B. Collins podcast, Raul Velez, who made a house call today. Back in Washington, the Supreme Court held oral arguments regarding the Trump travel ban, also known as the Muslim ban. And we should note that it is version 3.0 that the court is reviewing. So the original screed that was put together, we think, by Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, and perhaps with some input from Rudy Giuliani, that's not what is before the court. It is the more refined version that was rewritten twice to try to pass judicial muster. And so, given that, the justices appear to be willing to give great deference to the power of the president to control immigration policy, even though his campaign comments indicated that it was race-based and was aimed at Muslims. In the oral arguments, the court watchers say they can't find 5 obvious justices ready to vote to overturn the president's ban by upholding the appeals that have come before it from lower courts. And in the oral arguments, the eyes were on the Chief Justice, John Roberts, and on the swing vote on the court, Anthony Kennedy. And from their questioning, it appears that they believe the president has the authority to do this. And one of the Jewish justices, Elena Kagan, appointed by Obama, offered a hypothetical scenario. She said in a future president who is a vehement anti-Semite, and he makes or she makes denigrating comments about Jews, then comes into office and bans entry to the United States from Israel. The question is, what are reasonable observers to think in that context? And the argument coming from the representative of the administration was, well, that's a tough hypothetical, but no matter what standard you apply, this proclamation is constitutional. So even if the basis of it is hatred or animus toward a specific group of people, it appears these justices are going to be deferential to the president. Neil Katyal, who was the lawyer for the challengers, a group of people from Hawaii, he was asked about why courts should second-guess a president's national security judgments. And Justice Roberts said, well, you know, the president may have made comments during the campaign, but is there a statute of limitations on that? So this is troubling. But when you look at the precedents under the law, there is wide latitude given to the president on immigration policy. And I'm sorry to see that the right wing of this court doesn't see the specific motivation that Trump cited. And he used it to pander to voters who are afraid of or hate Muslims. And to me, this is grossly un-American, and it's really obvious that that's the case. So we'll see their final ruling. It'll probably be one of the last released at the end of June. Now, I don't want to give you whiplash, but in the same 24-hour period, a judge on the influential District of Columbia Appeals Court, John Bates, who, by the way, was appointed by a Republican, George W. Bush, he issued a ruling saying that Trump's decision to cancel the DACA program that had been set up by Obama was based on virtually unexplained grounds and claims that weren't justified, that the program was just unlawful. And so he ridiculed the arguments that had been put forward about why Trump was canceling DACA. And the judge issued a ruling that the protections for the so-called dreamers must stay in place, and this is the critical part, the government must resume accepting new applications. So Judge Bates did put a stay on his decision for 90 days to give Homeland Security an opportunity to explain the reasons for canceling it. But this is the third ruling in recent months against the administration's rollback of DACA. Judge Bates, as I mentioned, nominated by George W. Bush, said that the decision to end DACA was arbitrary and capricious because the department failed to adequately explain its conclusion that the program was unlawful. So that gives new hope to dreamers. Their issues have been really out of sight for the last 30 or 45 days, and the court rulings have taken the pressure off Congress to act, and it's also taken away leverage from Trump to use them as hostages to, for example, win funding for his southern border wall. Meanwhile, those migrants who started in Honduras and were heading north, there were 1,100 of them originally, and when Trump saw them on Fox and Friends, he shit his pants and just really showed what a scaredy cat he is, or at least that he likes to act afraid and try to drum up fear among his Twitter fans. So the 1,100 has dwindled to 130 migrants, most of them women and children, and they're on their way to the American border at Tijuana. They stopped in Mexicali for a bite to eat, and they're being driven in vans at this point. So we haven't heard more from Trump about this recently, but this was the threat that he felt required the immediate start of building a border wall, as if that is going to stop people who come here and ask for asylum. So I find this, as you know, just ludicrous, and I hope that the government will follow its own rules and accept the applications for asylum as these people approach the border and give them a fair evaluation. There's a great court ruling that came from the Minnesota Court of Appeals yesterday, upholding a district judge's October ruling related to the valve turners. Now, I interviewed Emily Johnston and Michael Foster back in January and shared it in a podcast here. They were part of a group that orchestrated an effort to shut down various pipelines on a single day a couple of years ago. And their cases are just being adjudicated now. Michael Foster is in a state prison. Well, I'm not sure where he is. He's in prison, and he is serving 1 year of a 3-year sentence, and the other 2 years were suspended. Emily Johnston, the other woman I met, she's a poet from Seattle, is part of the group of defendants in Minnesota, and they are going to be permitted to present a necessity defense. Now, as you know, this is based on the concept that if you're walking by a burning house and you go into it to rescue an animal or a human, you're not trespassing because, well, there is a greater urgency. And the idea that the valve turners are promoting is that the climate change issues threaten the planet in a way that requires them to make a public statement because our government is not taking action. So Emily Johnston said, if we get to present a necessity defense trial and the jury has to grapple with full knowledge of our shared reality, the jig is up for the fossil fuel industry, and the end of their devastating business model comes into much clearer view. One of the people who will testify is James Hansen, the former NASA scientist who's been called the father of modern climate change awareness. He's already submitted a statement. It's his expert opinion that global warming is in the danger zone, and he concludes by saying the defendants, by their actions, as I understand them, aimed to prevent the urgent and growing danger and to turn around the government's failure to date meaningfully to address it. So, in the cases that were brought in North Dakota and Montana, the judges rejected the arguments for a necessity defense. And one of Johnston's co-defendants, whose name is Clapstein, let me get her first name here, Annette Clapstein, she is a retired lawyer, and she said, I'm encouraged to see the courts across the country seem increasingly willing to allow the necessity defense in climate cases. I believe that many judges are aware that our political system has proven itself disastrously unwilling to deal with the catastrophic crisis of climate change, which leaves as our only recourse the actions of ordinary citizens like ourselves and the courts and juries of our peers to stand in judgment of those actions. I haven't mentioned much about the Cosby case because it's getting so much coverage in the mainstream media, and frankly, I don't have a lot to add here. But it has gotten interesting because the judge in the retrial has permitted testimony that was not permitted the first time. And we know that the accuser, Andrea Constand, got a payment of $3.4 million. There's also disputed testimony from a colleague of Constand's who says that she told her that she had an opportunity to score some money and didn't reference a rape scene or other coercion from Bill Cosby. I don't think Cosby was mentioned in the alleged comments between those two. But it is a different trial from what we saw the first time, and the prosecution has rested, so the defense will make its final comments, and then it should go to the jury in the very near future. A couple of more items related to Alex Manassian. He's the man accused of driving that Ryder van down the sidewalk in Toronto, where he mowed down 10 people who were killed and many others who were injured. And there are two comments that I need to make about this. In the show file for today's podcast, I am linking to a video sequence that somebody posted on Facebook for me, and it shows that the police officer in Toronto who finally apprehended Alex Manassian didn't shoot him. He had his gun out. His gun was pointed at Manassian. They were standing 15 or 20 feet apart. Manassian extended his arm and appeared to be pointing a pistol at the cop. Manassian begged the cop to shoot him and shoot him in the head. He wanted suicide by cop. The officer refused to grant that wish. And at what appears to be considerable risk to the officer, he stood there and basically maneuvered, danced around, and finally moved in and disarmed the suspect without a single shot being fired. And I urge you to watch this video. I especially want you to watch it if you're a police officer, because it is not always necessary to shoot to kill. It is not always necessary to shoot at all. But in America, our cops are so trigger happy that we have just this constant flood of cases where we have dead people who were unarmed, who likely were not white, and there are many lingering questions that are legitimate about whether the use of deadly force was necessary. Now, the other comment I have about the Manassian case, I mentioned yesterday that he identified as a part of the incel rebellion, and he posted on Facebook this kind of bizarre comment where he referred to himself as Private Recruit Manassian, and that the incel rebellion has already begun. And I explained that incel refers to involuntary celibacy. And these are guys who feel that they're entitled to have sex with women, even though they are unable to form relationships with women. And, of course, this is a twisted, misogynistic view. What I find bizarre is that in mainstream media accounts, they seem afraid to use this term incel and to describe it. And I watched the public television news hour last night. They danced around the issue. They wouldn't use the phrase involuntary celibate. And I found that in several mainstream media accounts today as well. I don't get it. I mean, Trump has lowered the standards for pussy grabbing and all kinds of comments in the media. I don't understand why that one is seen as off limits these days. Well, my next story is about the troubled nomination of Ronnie L. Jackson. He's a medical doctor. He's a Navy admiral. He runs the White House doctors operation, and he's the guy who gave Trump this really over-the-top physical evaluation earlier this year. And when Trump fired the head of the VA, he named his personal doctor as the new leader of the Veterans Affairs Department. Only this guy's never run a major organization, and it's believed that he would be an easy mark for those who wish to privatize some or all of the VA services. So Ronnie Jackson's nomination has run into a huge buzzsaw. And I'll get into the details in a moment. But first, I want to smack Rachel Maddow a little bit. I watched her show last night, and there was so much other news about President Macron, about Trump, about the Iran deal, about the forthcoming Senate vote on Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. All of those, I think, are much more important than the Ronnie Jackson case, and she devoted virtually her whole program to a nomination that is very likely to be withdrawn in the very near future. Now they're making noises that Trump wants to allow him to ride this out. But the reports are that Jackson is a serial binge drinker. During official White House travel, there are many accounts of him being seriously intoxicated. There was one case during the Obama presidency. White House staff needed to reach Jackson for medical reasons. They found him passed out in his hotel room after a night of drinking. And it appears that's not the only case. There are also over 20 people who have spoken to Senator John Tester and others who have serious complaints about Jackson's management style. So I think his nomination is dead on arrival. But MSDNC, I also watched part of Chris Hayes' show. That's all they were talking about, is scuttling the Ronnie Jackson nomination, when Ronnie Jackson's doing a really good job of that all on his own. Now, speaking of problems with travel and drinking, there's a new study about alcohol abuse in the Federal Air Marshal Service. It is so rampant that the TSA, which oversees the program, has had to monitor whether the armed guards show up for their flights sober. Now, this is a largely pointless exercise in security theater, and that's a term that I've used that's also quoted from Robert McLean, a whistleblower who I interviewed several years ago. He's an air marshal who was fired by the TSA after disclosing that there was a plan to reduce the number of air marshals on overnight flights. After a Supreme Court case, he was rehired after a 10-year battle. He said, based on how the program is run now, most of what the air marshals do is just security theater. It serves absolutely no purpose other than showing that they are doing something. And, of course, by locking the cockpits and allowing some pilots to carry sidearms, the threat of in-air hijacking has dropped significantly. And it can be measured not by the interception of weapons by TSA or by takedowns of would-be terrorists by air marshals. There haven't been any serious hijacking incidents in American airspace that I know of since 9/11. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Morgan Weiser, who has an annual subscription and just renewed it. Thank you, Morgan. Benny Alto from Oregon, he's got multiple subscriptions. Arlene Montemorano is a good $10 a month supporter. And Jason Ferguson is in the mix every month, too. I invite you to join in. We've had a rash of new sign-ups in response to my birthday quest, but we haven't reached my goal yet. So if you're on the fence, get off the fence. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. Find the menu tab, click on that, click on Become a Subscriber. It lands you on the sign-up page. You can choose from $10, $20, $5 a month. Yeah, I forgot that one. There's also a $1 24-hour pass. So if there's a specific interview that you'd like to hear, like our latest interview with Otis R. Taylor Jr. regarding the awful conditions for immigrants who are being held in a county jail just 5 or 7 miles away from where I sit. That interview is exclusive to subscribers right now, and you can access it for just $1 on one of our 24-hour passes. All the info at peterbcollins.com. You may know that I'm a big fan of the young journalist Kevin Gosztola. He runs Shadowproof, and his latest column takes on the pundit Jonathan Alter. Alter is a paid MSNBC analyst. He also writes for the Daily Beast. And like many centrist establishment Democratic voices, he is urging progressives who are populating some of the congressional primaries this year to get out of the race and get out of the way. Because he believes that they can't win. He believes that they should know that they can't win, and they should do us all a favor and shave off a little democracy in favor of trying to win. And this advice is not peculiar to Mr. Alter. There are a whole lot of people who believe that the future of the Democratic Party is center-right, that the only way to counter Trump is center-right, and they are dead wrong, because it is the Bernie Sanders voter, whether Bernie is the guy at the top of the ticket or not, who is really active in the Democratic Party today. And that's where expanding turnout can come from. Not from the center, not from the center-right. But here's a quote from Jonathan Alter. A remnant of lefties are still living in Jill Stein land, acting as if midterms are in the bag and they can indulge in expensive primary fights over minor policy differences that drain resources from the constitutionally critical task at hand. And this kind of condescension and paternalism is all over the place. Big story in Sunday's New York Times showed how here in California, where there are a number of districts currently held by Republicans that are in play, the Democratic Party is muscling to try to force people out of the primaries. One case, a medical doctor, she's a pediatrician named Mai Con Tran. She is running in Orange County, and she has a Vietnamese surname. There's a huge Vietnamese American population there, and they vote. But the DNC, the DCCC, showed her a poll and told her to get out of the race. Says Dr. Tran, I said to them, frankly, let the voters decide. But the DCCC didn't take that advice, and in short order, they have basically said that they are endorsing one of many Democrats in the race, a guy named Gil Cisneros, who until last year was a frickin' Republican. And he's a Navy veteran, like so many of the soldiers and spies the Democrats are running this year. There are many other examples of that across the country, including the case of Laura Moser in Texas that we covered recently. Trump and the French President Emmanuel Macron have put on quite a show of public displays of affection in the last couple of days, and Trump tried to match the big Bastille Day military parade that he saw in Paris last year with a review of troops in Revolutionary War costumes on the South Lawn of the White House. Pretty bizarre. And I'm sure by now you've seen footage of all the love and affection expressed between Trump and Macron, all these handshakes and hand-holding. You've probably also seen the footage of Melania rejecting Trump as he tries to hold her hand in public. But beyond the optics, there's something important going on here. Macron is trying to use his pandering friendship with Trump to keep Trump from jumping off a cliff and pulling the United States unilaterally out of the multi-nation deal with Iran over its nuclear intentions. And I agree with Macron in this case. And he gave a speech to a joint session of Congress today, and it appears that he may at least delay Trump's next trigger point, which is in mid-May, to opt out of certifying compliance of Iran with the deal. So Trump is modifying his language a little bit. He still trashes the Iranian deal, but he says he could agree to a new deal negotiated by American and European officials if it was strong enough. Now, this is a non-starter with Iran, and while Macron is making noises about how, oh yeah, wouldn't it be great to include missile restrictions in the agreement with Iran, Iran will not sit still for that for 1 minute. And so in the speech to the joint session, Macron got a lot of applause, a lot of love, until he started talking about climate change. Then it got pretty chilly over there on the Republican side. About the climate, he said, some people think that securing current industries and their jobs is more urgent than transforming our economies to meet the challenge of global change. I hear, but we must find a transition to low-carbon economy. What is the meaning of our life, really, if we work and live destroying the planet while sacrificing the future for our children? So I give him credit. He was diplomatic in his presentation, but he didn't water down his position. Then he said, related to Iran, our objective is clear. Iran shall never possess any nuclear weapons. France and the U.S. can, but not Iran. Not now, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, never, he said. But this policy should never lead us to war in the Middle East. Adding that respect for sovereignty must include Iran, which represents a great civilization. Let us not replicate past mistakes, he said. Let us not be naive on one side. Let us not create new wars on the other side. And in a press briefing with Macron, Trump, moving into his bullshit salesman mode, starts publicly now praising Kim Jong-un. He said that Kim has been very open and very honorable. And I think, here's the full quote. Kim Jong-un, he really has been very open and I think very honorable from everything we're seeing. So this is Trump buttering up an adversary, and it's pretty ugly to watch him because he's shameless. And I guess that makes me cringe. Mick Mulvaney is the guy who has two jobs. He's a director of the Budget Office and the interim director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which he is trying to dismantle for the most part. And he gave a remarkable speech to a bunch of banksters yesterday, and he admitted that when he was a member of Congress, the only way you could get a meeting with him is if you donated money to his campaign. He said, if you're a lobbyist who never gave us money, I didn't talk to you. If you're a lobbyist who gave us money, I might talk to you. He continued, if you came from back home and sat in my lobby, I talked to you without exception, regardless of the financial contributions. And note that he received over $60,000 from payday lenders. And he's now paying them back with exorbitant interest over at the Consumer Protection, Financial Protection Bureau. And there's a great piece by Celia Wexler at my affiliated website, whowhatwhy.org today. I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast. But she notes also that Mulvaney has received this money from the payday lenders and that he has withdrawn at least one lawsuit against a payday lender, and he appears to be slow-walking investigations and lawsuits into several others. And the only real enforcement case that the CFPB has joined in was the crackdown on Wells Fargo with the $1 billion fine that was announced about a week ago. But otherwise, he has been loading up the agency with his cronies. He's got 8 people there making over $200,000 a year, and he appears to be doing that on purpose to taunt the members of Congress, because Elizabeth Warren wrote the legislation to set up this agency so that it got unlimited funding from the Federal Reserve. It didn't require the politics of Congress to get its money. And Mulvaney is begging Congress to rewrite the law and subject the agency to federal appropriations. Isn't that brilliant? Finally, today, I want to recommend a great piece written by Max Blumenthal that appeared yesterday at Truthdig. And it is a rebuttal to a piece that was published a couple of days ago at Truthdig by their columnist, Sonali Kolhatkar. And I know a little bit about Sonali. She hosts a radio show on Pacifica Radio here in California, and she has a fairly good progressive reputation. But the piece she wrote, entitled Why Are Some on the Left Falling for Fake News on Syria, was a piece of shit. And I just withheld comment on it because I don't like to just dump on other people in the kind of left independent media sphere. But Max Blumenthal did a very credible and polite job of taking her down and rebutting virtually every argument that she offered, including her disdain for Robert Fisk's reporting and her citation of Al Jazeera as a counter to Fisk's on-the-ground reporting. So it's an excellent piece. I won't quote further from it because I'm out of time here today, but I do encourage you to read it. And I always find Max Blumenthal to be a real honest journalist covering controversial issues. Thanks for listening to this daily news and comment podcast. We post it on YouTube. And when you're there, click on the subscribe button, and maybe YouTube will give me some money someday.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.